Welcome back to the channel. My name's Brian Kingsbury. Today we're going to do another segment of Brian Reads the News. I've got bunches of stories up on my channel now. If you like this segment, you'll be sure to want to check those out. Today we're going to get into 10 fairy tales that are way darker than you realized as a kid. 10 fairy tales that are way darker than you realized as a kid. Let's get into it. So this article comes from people.howstuffworks.com and is by Patrick J. Geiger. The article says, if you grew up watching classic Disney movies such as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Cinderella, or reading the Little Golden Book version of Pinocchio, you're probably accustomed to thinking of fairy tales as wholesome entertainment for young children. That's why it may come as a shock to watch Snow White again as an adult and realize that it's a bit macabre. For example, when jealous queen orders the huntsman to kill Snow White, she demands that he bring back the girl's heart in a jewel box as evidence of his violent deed. And that's just the relatively sanitized Disney-fed version. In the early 19th century version, published by the German brothers Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, the queen wants to devour Snow White's lungs and liver. The original versions of most of these fantasy stories are filled with plot twists that belong in a modern slasher film. In part, that's because fairy tales didn't start out as children's stories, but rather as tawdry folk tales that grown-ups told for entertainment after the kids went to bed. When the Brothers Grimm published their first edition of a nursery and household tales in 2 volumes in 1812 and 1815, it was meant for adults. After only disappointing sales did they decide to tone down the material and make it suitable for kids. The tales mostly came from friends and relatives, which the brothers significantly revised. Many were variations of French fairy tales already written by people like French writer Charles Perrault. But even after the Brothers Grimm sanitized the tales and didn't totally eliminate the scary stuff, that's because fairy tales were intended not just to entertain children, but also to educate them about the consequences of evil deeds. The late psychologist Bruno Bettelheim, for one, argued that the creepy stuff helps children to grow emotionally, but allowing them to grapple with fears that are a part of growing up. So this article goes through 10 stories that are far more disturbing than you realized as a kid. They go through Pinocchio, The Little Mermaid, Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Rumpelstiltskin, The Snow Queen, Rapunzel, and Sleeping Beauty. I think what we're going to do is we're going to do 2 tonight, and then we're going to continue this series the rest of the week until we've made it all the way through all 10 of these stories. Let's start with the first 2, Pinocchio and The Little Mermaid. When you think back to the 1940 Disney version of Pinocchio, you probably remember the puppet's nose growing to indicate fibs, and this cute little pal Jiminy Cricket who sings the movie's memorable song, When You Wish Upon a Star. But as Time magazine critic Richard Corliss notes, quote, the movie also taught moral lessons in the most useful way by scaring the poop out of the little ones. The script emphasizes, for example, the dangers of running away from home and falling into the clutches of an evil adult. As kidnapper Stromboli tells Pinocchio, quote, when you grow too old you will make good firewood. But the film's source material, an 1883 story by Carlo Collodi, is even more disturbing. When Pinocchio is teased about his wooden head by his cricket companion, the enraged puppet throws a hammer and kills him. The second fairy tale we're going to talk about tonight is The Little Mermaid. It says here, film critic Roger Corliss praised the 1989 Disney film version of The Little Mermaid, the tale of a prince named Eric who falls in love with Ariel, the beautiful half-human sea creature, as a model of buoyancy and poignancy. But the source material, an 1837 story by Danish writer Hans Christian Andersen, is considerably darker. It says here, in the film version, Ariel makes a deal with Ursula, the sea witch, who converts her temporarily into a human in exchange for her singing voice, which the witch puts inside a seashell. In Andersen's telling, the witch silences the Little Mermaid by cutting off her tongue, and unlike the movie, the original story doesn't end happily ever after. Instead, the Little Mermaid loses her prince to a human bride and smiles at him one last time as she and her sisters rise slowly to heaven. So there you have it, the first 2 fairy tales in this article of the 10 fairy tales that are way darker than you realized as a kid. If you like this sort of thing, be sure to come back and watch the rest of the story. I'm going to be voicing the rest of this article and let you know about the other 10 stories as well. Let's take a look again at this list. Up next, we're going to talk about Cinderella and Little Red Riding Hood. So be sure to hit that subscription button, ring that notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I drop the next segment of this story. Thanks again for watching this segment of Brian Reads the News. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.